thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, how are you?
Doing great, doing great. How's your day going?
Doing well, thank you.
Chamber of Commerce. Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. Tell us, what have you been working on today? I understand from Albie, who's on his way back over here, you guys have a busy morning.
It has been a very busy day. So we're on the floor this afternoon. We have about 42, 43 bills I think, that are on second reading. So just preparing for that as policy chair. I'm the one who handles the briefings for my caucus, just making sure that I, understand all these moving pieces, understanding all of that. So I haven't quite had a break, but I'm glad to be able to meet with you all. Where is everybody? I don't see any cameras on.
Throughout the morning.
I'm not mad at that. Listen, you got to eat.
I don't think that many are familiar with that term and what exactly you do in that role.
At caucus, I serve as policy chair, which means that I'm on the leadership team. So working closely with our Democratic co-leaders, representatives Bobby DuBose and Evan Jenny. We also have our leadership team. We have co-leaders. We have a pro tem sponsor. What are our members' priorities that are moving? What are bills that we perceive as bad bills? How we always, attack those bad bills in debate, etc. And just really keeping my finger on the pulse of what's moving. It also means that I work and just prepare their committee members from our caucus, preparing them for committee meetings. And we also have, including a whip. But yeah, my role is to be in charge of policy. And people, teenagers with AMs in the Tampa Bay community who sometimes get caught up between the DJJ system and the DCF system and foster care and things. And they were so astute. And one asked me, like, what is your weakness? And I was like, whatever, I'm Superwoman, I have none. And I was like, no, I'm just kidding. It's really difficult being in this role with it being a part-time legislature, because I'm also an attorney, and so I have a practice, and so trying to balance that is very difficult, particularly during session. But yes, technically it is a part-time job and part-time legislature. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I want to ask you, obviously in your role with the Democratic caucus, you're in the minority party. It's a lot of playing defense, but what are some things that you're excited about that are actually moving, that are some Democratic priorities, and how you're being able to get some bills moving.
We have some good bills that are moving. I'd love to lift up Christine Hunchofsky, who is a freshman representative from the Parkland area. She actually was mayor of Parkland prior to being elected to the Florida House. And she recently was able to get a very important environmental conservation land renamed for the late Representative Kristen Jacobs, who passed away last year due to after a battle with cancer, a long battle with cancer. And so things like that we can do that garner bipartisan support and certainly make us all feel good, that's wonderful. And that was the first Democratic bill to pass off the floor of the House. But we still have a number of priorities that are not moving. There was a COVID liability shield bill that just went through. And, even though my caucus, we worked really diligently to try to amend those bills at every committee stop, offer ways to try to get it to the point where it could be more of a bipartisan bill. Unfortunately, those attempts were rejected. And so to me, that's always unfortunate when we're not able to have that give and take in the process. So that's been an element of session that's been a little frustrating this year.
Gotcha, gotcha. What do you think is the, how do I put this, what's moving in the House that, obviously the Democratic caucus is opposing, but that you guys might be able to at least amend to be able to be okay with it or try to kill it? I mean, is there anything that's like, hey, we might have a shot at this?
That's everything. The way that I look at it, that's everything. No, everything is always fair game to try and work it and to try to make it better. And you'll see, even with House Bill 1, which was debated on the floor last week, it is it's commonly known as the anti-protester bill, and it's a priority of Governor DeSantis's. Although when we get out of the echo chamber of the legislature and actually talk to people in real life and look at the polling that was done, it's a very unpopular bill across the spectrum. Like, Republicans don't like it, Democrats don't like it, NPAs don't like it, because they perceive it as infringing on people's First Amendment rights, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, etc. And so there's an opportunity where, even though that was like a bill where we absolutely threw down the gauntlet, we still offered amendments to make it better, like to try and make it better. But I don't know, that it's been very difficult to get any movement on anything like that this year. One really bright spot for me, though, I'll share this with you all, especially given that you're from the Pinellas area, and our speaker, Chris Sprouse, is from Pinellas. A very bright spot for me this legislative session was a couple of weeks ago. We have Representative Camilla Brown from Florida House District 45 in our caucus. She represents parts of Orlando. She's been a really wonderful champion when it comes to healthcare and to extending Medicaid rights, or Medicaid coverage, extending Medicaid coverage to new mothers. Currently, under Florida system, new moms are only entitled to 2 months of Medicaid coverage postpartum. She was able to work with Speaker Sprouse and Representative Colleen Burton in a bipartisan way to get that extended to 12 months. That is an incredible win that all Floridians should be proud of. We all stood together at a press conference, Republicans, Democrats, to announce this great news. It'll lead to better healthcare outcomes for moms and for families. And so I don't want to suggest that there aren't opportunities for us to work together, and where we've actually been able to see some fruit born of those productive relationships. So that's one, and it's been a real pleasure working with Speaker Sprouse on that initiative.
No, that was a great compromise, and being able to figure out a way to expand that. I watched that press conference. It was one of the best ones that I've seen from up here. I mean, it really was awesome, heartwarming. So, speaking of the Tampa Bay area, and obviously we have the Bay Area legislative delegation, so much cross between the Bay and everything like that. How do you see the way that the Bald Bay Area legislative delegation is working together? I mean, for things that aren't really partisan, but just partisan for the Tampa Bay area.
Sure, I can't think of any big initiatives that have been outlined for us as a delegation. Usually, so this is my third year, my second term, and I remember last term, the Balls delegation, we were working on some environmental issues together, and particularly with respect to stemming red tide, studying that and its causes and effects, and how to mitigate. But I don't think we've outlined any particular legislative priorities this time around.
Gotcha. Is there anything that you would like to see?
I mean, I always think it's great when we can work together on issues where we have common ground, and environmental issues certainly seem to be ripe for bipartisan cooperation, and especially with Speaker Sprouse talking about the need for Florida to be more intentional when it comes to resiliency, building up our resiliency. He has great concern for the environment. So I think that would be low-hanging fruit for us to try to work together on.
Great. So just trying to think for a second. Albie's going to be joining us shortly. But in terms of the way that the counties are working together, especially when it comes to transportation, it seems that there is, kind of Hillsborough has one priority, and Pinellas has different priorities when it comes to transportation and trying to get over to Hillsborough, especially when it comes to the 41-mile BRT from Wesley Chapel down to downtown St. Pete, going through downtown Tampa. I obviously it's not quite under the state legislator's purview, but do you have any feelings on that? Are you I guess the alternative in the priority is a train from USF to downtown Tampa. How do you see that working and being
Sure.
able to, come to a compromise or work together for that?
A couple thoughts on that. The first is that, we've pushed really hard to have these projects funded, have pushed with a sustained and concerted effort over a number of years. And then COVID-19 happens, which no one could plan or anticipate other than Bill Gates, apparently. I mean, but he sees the future. So here we are left with these challenging times in terms of funding. But then we also have a new administration in the federal government that is doing what it can to provide, pass on funds to the states to provide direct relief. And so I'm curious to see what our state's budget will look like after the next revenue estimating conference. The current budget that was proposed, that was released last Friday, is based on our last estimating conference, which was sometime in December. So we're due to have another estimating conference, I think, next week. And so we'll have a better sense of what the budget will look like and what fundings to agencies like DOT will look like for departments. And I think that's really, I'm interested to see what happens. And I want to make sure that as a region, this is why regional cooperation is so important. Because yes, it may be Tampa's turn at bat right now or Hillsborough's turn at bat right now, but then the next time it's Pinellas or it's whatever. And if you look at other areas in the state that cooperate as a region, they're able to get so much more done for their areas of the state. I feel like South Florida is a very good example of this. I think, kind of that Orange, Osceola, Seminole area, they're starting to operate more thoughtfully as a region as well. And so in Tampa Bay, we absolutely have to do that. And we have to make sure that the state understands, this is our turn. We've kind of waited our turn. These projects are due to be funded. We need to get them funded. There's also the matter of the lawsuit that we have to work through, or we got that decision. And so now, in Hillsborough, we've got to go back and have another referendum, I think, to get some more funding for transportation at the local level. But long story short, I think we need to think about these issues more broadly and more cooperatively as a region.
Great. Well, I am going to bring in Albie and let Albie kind of take over from here, if that's all right, Albie.
No, that is great, Matt. And again, I'm switching places on you, aren't I?
You are all over the place.
It is. It's still an active time in Tallahassee. And Representative, thank you so much. And I am so sorry that that I'm not there in person to meet with you, but we really appreciate it. And actually, it's a little loud. If I'm going to close this door here to make sure. Sorry about that. Got a little bit loud over here.
No worries.
Well, Matt, I know you talked a little bit about the regional, about transportation has definitely, obviously has impacted our region as a whole, but Representative, I wanted to kind of pick your brain in here. I didn't get to hear the beginning parts of your opening introduction here, but I know that you were pretty outspoken specifically on some of the issues that went up before the House floor last week. I didn't know if you want to speak a little bit more as we kind of move forward. Specifically, we got House Bill 1 that came through. I know that you're going to be talking on some of the other issues that will be coming up before the House floor too, but I wanted to hear a little bit more about your thoughts on House Bill 1 last week and what you think that kind of does moving forward for the state as a whole.
Sure. Thank you for that question. And we did talk about House Bill 1 a bit. And I was explaining that, it is a priority of the governor's. But I think what happens in Tallahassee, sometimes we get in our partisan echo chambers and don't always think about, and we should always be thinking about what the people want and what the people think. And there's polling that shows that this bill is very unpopular across the political spectrum because people perceive it as infringing on their First Amendment rights. And so what this bill does, it does a number of things. one that may be of interest to members or chamber members who are on this call, it takes local control away from municipalities in terms of setting their law enforcement budgets. So the bill contains a provision that if the city decreased its law enforcement budget year over year, then the state attorney for that circuit could appeal the budget to the governor, and then the governor and the cabinet get to reset the budget. I mean, I can't even, as I articulated, it's very difficult to get it in my head, to get it to make sense. And there certainly are times where we want to have, where there are competing interests between having the state regulate a particular industry or some aspect of business or how things are done versus having home rule and making sure that we are preserving the sanctity of that for our cities and counties. But this is not one of them. You know, local electeds are elected to do that and to care for their local constituencies, and they know what's best for their budget. We have a member, Christine Hunchofsky, who I'd mentioned earlier. She was the mayor of Parkland prior to becoming elected as a state representative. And so in the wake of that horrible tragedy at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, you know, the city of Parkland certainly increased its law enforcement budget. You know, it had to, account for different things and, prepare should there ever be a tragedy like that would occur again. But then after that, maybe their budget decreased, or you may have law enforcement agencies who need to make capital outlay expenditures and acquire new cruisers or new vehicles or equipment for their officers. But perhaps the next year they don't need that. And so, to allow the state attorney, who's a constitutionally elected officer, to have control over local budgets, and really ultimately the governor and the cabinet to have control over local budgets, makes no sense. That's designed to be red meat to a political base to try to divide and say, this bill is pro law enforcement, when in reality it's anti-cities. There are other acts of the bill that create 6 new criminal offenses. We don't need those criminal offenses. Law enforcement already has tools on the books in statute to help them should a protest turn violent. No one condemns violence. So it's like, what is this about? And even though this bill was introduced on January 6th, presumably in response to the violent insurrection that took place at the nation's capital, when it was first released, it was actually last September at the height of Black Lives Matter protesters. So again, it seems like it's just, driving these wedge issues and dividing communities. And I think that our country has been through enough division. We have far more in common than we would realize if we would just, take a deep breath, take a step back, and maybe allow us to connect on that human level. So House Bill 1 is a disappointing bill to me for a number of reasons. It's an unnecessary bill on top of that. And so it's the only bill so far this session that the Democratic caucus took a caucus position against. Mm-hmm. We do that only with the most severe bills, but that's one where we felt like we had to draw a line in the sand and stand up, not just for Democrats around the state, but for everybody, because our constitutional rights belong to us all.
Well, thank you, Representative. And Matt, I'm going to punt over to you to see if we have any.
I got a question. Yeah, we got a question from the audience. Representative, do you expect any voting rights bills to come before the legislature, any amendments that would match like what happened up in Georgia recently?
Yes, so we do have there's Senate Bill 90, which is being carried by, I want to say it's Senator Baxley in the Senate, and it would eliminate drop boxes, which is unfortunate because let's just level set. Florida did a great job in the 2020 election. And you just think about how far we've come over the course of the last 20 years, where we went from being the laughingstock of the nation to actually setting the gold standard. And that is because we have a great Secretary of State, and we have wonderful supervisors of elections all throughout our 67 counties that did a great job. And so you have this bill, which is unnecessary, but puts Florida in the context of this national narrative where it's basically, you see Republicans trying to make it more difficult for people to vote. And so that's troubling to me in Florida. We have our supervisors of elections who, by the way, are Republicans, Democrats. But above all else, they are servants, and they are the ones who are telling us that we do not need this bill. We also have a bill in the House that is starting to move. It's past one committee stop. That bill has too much in it for me to go into right now, but just suffice it to say that what we're trying to do is steer the conversation away from politics and focus on what we're hearing from our supervisors of elections. I'll tell you that at the first committee stop for the House bill, the supervisor from Lake County, who is a Republican, his name escapes me, but he came and testified and did not mince words and wondered if, the Florida legislature needed adult supervision in terms of trying to pass these bills that nobody asked for. So I'm concerned. We're keeping an eye on things, and we'll be prepared to push back.
Well, great. Well, is there anything that St. Pete Chamber can do across the bay from you to help? Is there anything that you'd like to see us help you champion?
Well, thank you for that. I will mention that I have House Bill 37, which is the Abandoned Cemeteries Bill. It was inspired by reporting by Tampa Bay Times reporter Paul Guzzo, who in 2019, I think was the first time he reported on the Zion Cemetery, which was an abandoned African-American cemetery that was lost to time, but through oral histories and intensive research, he was able to discover the location of it in Robles Park, where there is a Tampa Housing Authority structure on top, and there's some private landowners who have property on top of other parcels of land there. And it has led to a community conversation about what should be done when we find these abandoned cemeteries. And it's a tragic part of Florida's history that there was a time where even graveyards were segregated. We were segregated even in death. But as we discover these properties now, how should communities respond? It allows for great community conversation and openness and dialogue. How do we, protect the sanctity of the dead and those bodies that are there? How can we memorialize, what legal issues, my legal hat, I always have that on, what legal issues arise and how we think through that. So House Bill 37 that I'm sponsoring would create a statewide task force to examine this issue, to try to find other locations throughout the state where these cemeteries are. I know you have some over in Pinellas, even under Tropicana Field. And then there's some in Clearwater that were recently discovered. There's some in Jacksonville, there's South Florida. Here in Tallahassee, there's some under the Capital City Golf Course. So it is a statewide issue. I would love you to take a look at the bill and see if it's something that you would consider supporting. We've been able to start generating some bipartisan support for it, which is very important to me. I think oftentimes I appreciate the chamber's support. And I thank you for the invitation today. I'm just across the bridge. So, it's great for us to stay in touch.
No, absolutely. It's great to have you, and thank you, Albie, for getting us together on this. We're going to move over to our next guest unless there are any other questions for Representative Driskell. Just thank you very much. Come over on our side of the bay, and love to have you once you start meeting in person, have you talk to our folks. We'd really love that.
Absolutely. And I hope that you have a great rest of your day. I know it's lunchtime, so I thank you all for even tuning in, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to care about what's happening in our state and to be strong advocates. I left my social media in the chat, Fentrice 4FL. Feel free to stay connected, or if there's anything you wanted to talk about, feel free to shoot me a message and we can chat offline. So thank you.